Hello, fifth graders. Welcome to our next math lesson. Today we're going to take a look at Chapter 5, Lesson 1. The title of the lesson is called Use Patterns and Mental Math to Divide. And the lesson itself is going to start on page 239. Now, in this particular lesson, I'm going to teach you a little bit different than what the book is going to talk about. The book's going to talk about trying to figure out how many tens there are, how many, when you're dividing this many tens or this many tens. I'm not going to focus on that particular aspect in our lesson for today. I'm going to try to make it maybe a little bit simpler for you to do. I'm going to try to connect it a little bit more towards the multiplication unit that we did last chapter. So if you're just going to follow along in the book, some of the stuff might be confusing. I think this video is going to help you a little bit more with the division aspect of things. So as we start, take a look at the screen here. It says division is not that different from multiplication. It really isn't. There's a lot of similar features between division and multiplication. As a matter of fact, I would even go as far as to say that it's just division itself is just another way of looking at multiplication. It's just a different way of looking at it. So if you are getting better and improving on your multiplication facts, then division itself is a form of multiplication. And if you're still struggling with some of your multiplication facts, that's okay, because using division might actually help you with learning more of your multiplication facts. So for example, let's take a look at this column over here on the left-hand side. This is very similar to things that we did last chapter. So we would take 7 and we'd multiply it times 5. And when we take 7 times 5, hopefully we know the answer is 35. So I'm just going to go ahead and write 35 on the screen. And I just keep going down the list here. 6 times 3, 6 times 3. When I do my multiplication there, 6 times 3 is going to be 18. The next one I have there is 9 times 6, and 9 times 6 is going to give me 54. And then our last multiplication problem here is 8 times 10. 8 times 10 is going to give me the answer of 80. So multiplication is just taking my two factors here, 7 and 5 multiplying together, and it gives me 35, and so on and so forth. Division is very similar to multiplication, except the first number, which is 24, this would actually be the answer to my multiplication problem. So when I look at this problem here, when it says 24 divided by 6, another way to look at this is, let's look at this number right here, which is this 6. Let's look at this 6. And you got to ask yourself, is there a number that I can multiply 6 by to actually get the number 24? And if I do my multiplication right, hopefully I know that 6 times 4 is 24, so I'm going to put a 4 down here. So when you look at division, the cool thing about division is when you take this factor right here, and then you also take the answer, which would be a quotient. If you take these two right here and you multiply them together, it should give you whatever your first number is. Let's look at our next one here. This is 45. So rather than looking at this as 45 divided by 9, think of it this way. Let's look at this number right here, which is 9. What would I multiply the 9 by to get 45? 9 times what is 45? I think it's going to be 9 times 5. Yeah. So I'm going to put the 5 there. And if I check, 9 times 5 is 45. So that would definitely reinforce what I've been talking about earlier. The next one here, I have 63 divided by 7. Let me look at the 7 again and say, what number would I multiply 7 by to get 63? Now, I know some of us aren't the most solid in our 7s, 8s, and 9s yet, and we're going to get there. The more you use them, the more comfortable you're going to get. But when you take a look at this, 7 times 9 is actually 63. So if I multiply these two, 7 times 9 equals 63. Our last one here is 36 divided by 6. Again, I'm going to look at this one number right here. Is there a number I can multiply 6 by to get 36? And yes, there is. It'd be 6 times 6. So this answer here would be 6. So all I'm trying to do, get you to understand, boys and girls, is division is another form of multiplication. What are you going to multiply this number by to get this as your answer? This would be the product. What would you multiply 9 by to get 45? 7 to get 63. 6 to get 36. Okay. Dividing by units of 10, which this particular lesson talks about, is very similar to multiplying by units of 10. We actually did this, I believe, last chapter, but there is one major difference. So when we did this last chapter, these are all multiplication problems. And what we taught, at least hopefully what you remember, is I have 30 times 40. Now that can be a fairly big number to multiply, but what we did, if you remember right, is we just ignored the zeros. And when I ignored the zeros, what I did was I took 3 times 4. I just multiplied the non-zero numbers together. So I took 3 times 4, and I got 12 as my answer. Then I went back and I counted how many zeros are on there on this side, and there's 1 0 on this side. How many zeros are there on this side? There's 1 0 on this side. So I'm going to add those two numbers together. 1 plus 1 is 2. That means my answer needs 2 zeros. So this answer here would be 1,200. That's how I multiply that. And I use the same idea for the next problems I have on the board here. I'm going to ignore the zeros. I got 500 times 20. Ignore those zeros. If I do that, it's just 5 times 2. 5 times 2 is 10. Now notice I did create a 0 here because 5 times 2 is 10. Now I go back and count how many zeros do I have here. Well, this side has 2, and this side has 1. So I'm going to add those two numbers together. 2 plus 1 is 3. So I need to add 3 more zeros. And I'm going to add 3 zeros. And even though there are 4 zeros here, remember this 4th zero came because I multiplied 2 times 5, and that gave me 10. So this answer here would be 10,000. Same as here, I would just ignore the zeros in my 6,000 times 700, and I'm just going to go 6 times 7. 6 times 7 is 42, so I'll go ahead and put 42 down. And now there are 3 zeros on this side, there are 2 zeros on this side, so I'm just going to add those two numbers together. 3 plus 2 is 5, so I need to add 5 zeros onto my problem. And when I add 5 zeros onto my problem and then put my commas in the right spot, I see my answer is 4,200,000. Real quickly, last one here, I'm going to take 8 times 6, ignore the zeros. 8 times 6 is 48. And now I'm going to take my number of zeros and add them together. There's 1 0 on this side. There's 2 zeros on this side. So when I add those together, 1 plus 2 is 3. I'm going to add 3 zeros onto my answer. And the answer is 48,000. So I'm hoping that you remember that we did that last chapter. Well, this first unit is not multiplying them. We're going to divide them. So like I started the lesson with for today, this is the real number you want to look at over here is the 60. So this problem here, I'm going to take 360 divided by 60 equals some number. Again, like I've done, like I was doing before, let's just ignore the zeros for a moment. Just ignore the zeros. And if I ignore the zeros, I'm just left with this division problem. 36 divided by 6, okay? Now, if you remember, that was actually one of the problems I had on the first page. 36 divided by 6, 36 divided by 6. So what number would I multiply this 6 by to get 36? And if I do 36 divided by 6, that answer right there is going to be 6. Now, I'm going to also do what I did for multiplication. Count how many zeros I have on this side. Well, this side has 1 0. This side over here has 1 0. Now, if you remember on the previous page, when we were multiplying, we would take the number of zeros and we would add them together to figure out how many zeros would go here. Well, since division is pretty much the exact opposite of multiplication, we're going to do the same thing here, except we're going to do the opposite. And hopefully we know that the opposite of addition is actually subtraction. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take, there's 1 0 on this side, there's 1 0 on this side, and I'm going to subtract those two numbers together. 1 minus 1 is 0, which means that's going to tell me how many zeros do I add onto my answer. Well, if I add no zeros whatsoever, that means then the answer is just going to be the number 6. So I'm going to take 360 divided by 60 is just going to be 6. Let's do a couple more problems like that to help reinforce that idea. Again, I'm going to ignore the zeros in this problem here, 4,500 divided by 90. Just ignore the zeros. When I do that, my problem is just 45 divided by 9. So again, another way to look at this multiplication problem is what would I multiply 9 by to get 45? 9 times 5? Yeah, 9 times 5 is 45. So I'm going to go ahead and write my 5 down. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to take a look at the number of zeros I have. This side has 2 zeros here, and this side has 1 0. And since I'm dividing these two numbers, I'm actually going to subtract the number of zeros from each other. So this side has 2, and this side has 1. So 2 minus 1 is 1. That tells me I'm just going to add 1 0 onto my answer, and so the final answer there is going to be 50. Same thing down here for this problem here. 56,000 divided by 80. Let's go ahead and ignore the zeros. When we ignore the zeros, I just have 56 divided by 8. And again, another way to look at that is, what would I multiply 8 by to get 56? 8 times 7. 8 times 7 would actually be 56. So I'm going to go ahead and write my 7 down. Now I'm going to go back and subtract the zeros from each other. This side has 3 zeros. This side here has 1. So we take 3 minus 1. 3 minus 1 is 2. All right, so that means that tells me how many zeros I'm going to put in my answer. So I'm going to go ahead and throw 2 zeros on here, and this answer here is 700. I guess I'll go ahead and circle this one since this one's 50 as well. So here are my 3 answers. Again, take the number of zeros and subtract them from each other, and that'll tell you how many you're going to put on your answer. We'll do a couple more problems here. What I like about this next problem is there are going to be sometimes fifth graders where you cannot ignore every zero. You may actually have to bring 1 0 back onto it. And what I mean by that is this. Look at this problem here. If I were to ignore all the zeros here, then my problem would be 3 divided by 5. 3 divided by 5. And I know through my multiplication facts, there's nothing I can multiply 5 by to get 3. That just doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to bring one of these 4 zeros back into it. So now if I bring one of the zeros back in, now my new problem is what's 30 divided by 5? And when I do, what would I multiply 5 by to get 30? 5 times 6. 5 times 6 would actually give me 30. So I'm going to go ahead and write my 6 down. Now I'm going to go back and subtract the zeros. But remember, there's not 4 zeros here. I needed to use one of those zeros to help me with my initial division. So actually this side here only has 3 zeros that I'm hiding. Even though there's 4 zeros, I did bring one back to make the 3 a 30. So now this side has 3 zeros. This side only has 1 0. I'm going to subtract those two from each other. 3 minus 1 is 2. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 zeros onto my answer. And my answer for this particular problem is 600. Now, in the book also, they'll throw a couple of these types of problems where, okay, here's my division, 1,800, divided by some number equals 60. So this time we have to find this number. But boys and girls, this problem is very similar to the ones that we've done before. Because if you take a look at this, if I took 30,000 divided by 600, wouldn't that just be 50? So really what I'm doing is if you run across a problem that looks like this today, you could go ahead and just take this number and move it in here and then move this one on the outside. So then my new problem, I'm going to try to write it real quickly here. If you wanted to rewrite it and it's still the same problem, it'd be 1,000 divided by 60 equals, and now that's the answer you're trying to find. So these two problems here are saying the exact same thing. You can switch the quotient and this part of the division problem. You could switch these two around and it's still the same problem. Okay, so if you feel better rewriting it this way, then do it, because then we take a look at the non-zeros and we have 18 divided by 6. And 18 divided by 6 is 3. So 6 times 3 equals 18. So I'm going to put a 3 down. Now I'm going to go back and subtract the zeros. This side has 2. This side only has 1. 2 minus 1 is 1, which means I do need to put 1 0 onto my answer. So that answer finally is going to be 30. I think this problem here is going to be another one of those problems where I do have to add a 0 back onto it, because this would be the same as taking 40,000 divided by 800. Well, if I just did 4 divided by 8, 4 divided by 8 would not work because this number over here has to be bigger. So I'm going to bring one of those zeros back, and instead of it being 4, it's now going to be 40. So now I'm taking 40 divided by 8, or another way to look at it is, what would I multiply 8 by to get 40? 8 times 5. So 5 would definitely be the answer there. 8 times 5 is 40. Now let's go back and take a look at the zeros and subtract them. Remember, this side only has 3 zeros because you brought one of them back to make the 40. So I'm just ignoring these 3 zeros. So there's 3 zeros. This side has 2 zeros. So if I subtract those two, 3 minus 2 is 1. I have 1 0, so that means my final answer is going to be 50. Just a few more problems to do together. These are ones similar than in the book. So hopefully, again, let's just take a look at this. Ignore the zeros in the 210 divided by 30. This would be 21 divided by 3. What number will I multiply 3 by to get 21? And that answer would be 7. Okay, this side has 1 0. This side has 1 0. Subtract them. 1 minus 1 is 0, which means I'm not going to add any zeros whatsoever. So this problem answer here is 7. If I come back over here, take 48 divided by 6. 48 divided by 6. What would I multiply 6 by to get 48? Maybe 6 times 8. 6 times 8 is 48. Now let's go back and take a look at the zeros. This side has 1 0. This side has 1 0. If I subtract those two, 1 minus 1 is 0, which means I do not want to add any zeros at all. So the final answer here is going to be 8. If I scroll down to this one, again, I'm going to ignore the 15, ignore the 3 zeros. I have 15 divided by 3. What number would I multiply 3 by to get 15? I take 3 times 5 to equal 15. So I'm going to put the 5 down. Now let's go back and ignore the zeros. This side has 3 zeros. This side has 1 0. So if I take 3 minus 1, 3 minus 1 is 2. That means I need to add 2 zeros on my answer. So this final answer here is going to be 500. Our last one here, again, if I ignore the zeros, I'd have 2 divided by 4. 2 divided by 4. Well, I can't do that because this number is definitely bigger. This is not the same as 4 divided by 2. This is take 2 and divide it by 4. I can't do that, so I have to bring one of those zeros back. Now I have 20 divided by 4. Or what number would I multiply 4 by to get 20? 4 times 5. So I put a 5 down here. All right, now go back and what zeros did I ignore? This side ignored 4 zeros. This side ignored 2 zeros. So if I subtract those two, 4 minus 2 is 2. That means I do need to put 2 zeros in my answer. So once again, my answer was 500, similar as the answer over here. So I hope that this lesson helped you a little bit understand how to be able to do some division of bigger numbers a little bit more mentally by ignoring the zeros, do some division, and then go back and subtract the number of zeros from each other to figure out how many zeros you would actually put in your answer. All right, so if you take a look at your sheet, you'll see that your assignment is actually covering 2 pages today. On page 241, you are going to be responsible for doing numbers 10 through 25. And again, all of your problems today are very similar to the examples that we did in this video. There are no word problems in your lesson for today, so hopefully that's good news. The second part of your assignment is going to be to do page 243 as well, and you're going to do numbers 5 through 16. So these would be the 2 pages where your assignment is located. So if you have any questions, 5th graders, on any of these problems, please do not hesitate to reach out to me to ask questions. I'm here to help you the best that I can. If I don't hear from you, I'm going to assume, hopefully successfully, that you did the lesson very well. And with that, we will see you with the next video.